Excellent. And it looks like our participants are joining in.
Awesome. Great. Yay.
Yeah.
So
welcome, everyone. Yeah, very exciting. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm sure we have people from around the globe. Let's see here. Awesome. And Mel, maybe while people are joining, we can ask them where they're from and get them set up on the chat.
Absolutely. So we want to make this, I know with webinars, it's not as interactive as normal Zoom meetings because we can't see all of your amazing faces, but would love for you to use the chat function, and I'll be asking some questions of you during the session as well. And so I love seeing this global representation. Switzerland, Germany. Hey, I'm part German. Love it. Boston. And also would love tell us where you're from, but then also what is something that where you're from is known for. So I'm from Philadelphia, and Philadelphia cheesesteaks clearly are something that when I say I'm from Philly, people always scream out cheesesteaks to me. So would love to hear if there's anything fun or silly or interesting that is kind of a claim to fame for where you're from.
Awesome. I'd say Boston cream pie. I'm from or live in Boston, but I think I've ever actually eaten one. So.
I've had the Boston cream pie donuts. So.
Yeah, I think that works.
Ooh, nice. Columbia, known for its music. Absolutely.
Awesome. Love to see all this.
Oh, we got Africa. Yeah, New York, there's a lot. There's the pretzels, the cheesesteaks, I love it, the hot dogs.
That's great.
So, Steve, I used to live in Jersey City, so that's kind of that's like an extra New York borough by this time. South Africa, yes. Oh yeah, Eastern Pennsylvania, Crayola, absolutely.
Awesome. Great. Well, while we're just getting kicked off here, I'll welcome you all and just let you know just right off the bat that this session is being recorded. So we will make the recording available to all of you on our digital hub at eatsleepinnovate.com. And while folks are just joining, again, just welcome. This is our Eat, Sleep, Innovate virtual book club. So this is a place where the stories and people that are profiled in the book, we have informal discussions with them, as well as the people and organizations who are actually putting into practice the frameworks and tools in the book. And that is really the focus here today. And we'll start with just some introductions. So my name is Natalie Painchaud. I'm a director at Innovate. We are a growth strategy firm. I'm also the co-author of this happy yellow book here, Eat, Sleep, Innovate, together with my Innovate colleagues, Scott Anthony and Andy Parker, as well as our friend from DBS Bank, Paul Cobbin. And it is all about how to make creativity an everyday habit. And I am absolutely thrilled to welcome Melody Fillier, who is my co-host today, and is Senior Manager, Innovation and Organizational Capabilities at Johnson & Johnson, and also a certified Gallup Strengths Coach. So welcome, Mel, to the session. Thanks for being here.
No, I'm excited to be here, and I am reading in the chats. If you see my eyes going over, I just love seeing what people are saying about where they're from. And now I want to go to Mexico. Thanks, Mario. And Riesling, one of my favorite wines, so love it.
Awesome.
But really excited to be part of this session. And please use the chat. Let's have some fun. Let's interact the best we can in a virtual setting. And we can get started, Natalie. Let's do this.
Yeah, that sounds great. So we've got 45 minutes. We'll be respectful of your time. As Mel said, please ask your questions. We've got the Q&A set up. So I've got a whole bunch of questions, but we'll also be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. And as Mel said, we also have questions for you. So how did Mel and I come to be here together? So I had the good fortune, together with a team from Innosight, from work with Mel and the Johnson & Johnson Supply Chain team on a culture sprint. For reference, the culture sprint is profiled and described in detail in chapter 4 in the book. But I'll just briefly describe to you what it is. So it's a 6 to 8 week sprint where we work with a team or a department to, number one, design what are the desired behaviors. Number two, say what are some of the blockers or barriers? What are the things getting in the way? And then activate through what we call behavior enablers, artifacts, and nudges, which we lovingly refer to as beans. We'll talk about those a bit more in a moment. So the culture sprint's an opportunity for participants to live those desired behaviors, co-create some beans, and then develop a plan to implement and activate those. And Johnson & Johnson is on a journey. And so we want to really understand from Mel what the journey has been like and her experience. So Mel, could you just, kick us off with a brief overview of, who is Johnson & Johnson and what do you do?
No, absolutely. So I'm going to turn this back on our participants. And I would love for you to put in the chat, when you hear Johnson & Johnson, what comes to mind? Hopefully good stuff, but we'll see what you put in the chat. So what comes to mind when you hear Johnson & Johnson? Baby oil, babies, baby shampoo, health, cleaning, diversified healthcare company. Oh, look at all that. Tylenol, yes. Body wash, innovation. Thank you, Steve. Biomed, absolutely. So seeing a lot, General Johnson, diversity and innovation. Awesome, Craig. A giant global company, that is for sure. Global player, complex org. Thank you. Very complex. Pharma, COVID vaccine. Yes, very exciting on that front. Med devices. A lot of siloed businesses. We're trying not to be so siloed, but yes, absolutely. Cotton swabs. What's funny is I prefer Q-tips. Don't tell J&J. All right. So good. I see all of you, as you can see, every answer that's come up is very, very different. And that's what makes J&J such an amazing company, is that we are extremely diverse. And when we think about what our purpose is, I like to go back to Alex Gorski and his quote. And what he says is, we blend heart, science, and ingenuity to profoundly change the trajectory of health for humanity. And that is really, when we think of our North Star and our purpose, that is our focus, each and every individual across J&J, whether it's in consumer, and I saw people talking about baby products, Tylenol, Neutrogena, Aveeno, you name it, right? Or pharmaceuticals. Yes, we're working on a COVID vaccine, but we also have cardiovascular metabolism products, immunology, oncology, pulmonary hypertension, and then our medical device when we think about spine surgeries, knee replacements, sutras, even electrophysiology. We have our hands and our toes in a lot of different ponds, but at the end of the day, it really is about impacting health for everyone across the globe. And really excited that, I get to work for such an awesome company, and the fact that we also, each employee is expected to live by our credo. And if you've never read the J&J credo, I 100% recommend going to the website, just jnj.com, and reading it. And it really talks about what is our true purpose and expectations as an employee. First and foremost, it's the patients and the physicians and the other customers that we serve. That's our number one priority. Number two is our people. So each and every one of us is a priority for Johnson & Johnson. Number three is the community. We as stewards of J&J are expected and asked to go out into our community and serve. And then number four is our shareholders. And yes, they are number four, because if the top three are taken care of, the shareholders are going to do just fine. So.
Oh, thanks, Mel. And I can, attest to having had just the privilege and opportunity to work with J&J over pretty much my whole career at Innosight. I just can attest to everything that you just shared, and just the power of the credo, and encourage folks to go read that. And where our work started was, with your function, supply chain, which is something that's been in the news a lot lately, as really have stepped up in these difficult times during the pandemic. And kind of the starting point was, you and the team were sharing how you were seeing J&J really living its best day every day. And it was, how do we continue that? How do we keep up some of these behaviors? And J&J has these leadership imperatives, which everyone in the enterprise is aware of and really measured on, right? And this is where our conversation started. And while they include innovation, it's not limited to innovation, but ultimately it's about showing up consistently. It's how work gets done every day. It's about making those standards and the performance documents and the value statements everyday habits. So with that context, I'd love to hear from your perspective, Mel, the starting point and the objective for the sprint, and also how it connected with other culture and capability work that you all were doing.
Absolutely. So I think that, innovation has been a huge priority across J&J, but especially in supply chain. And that is why I was brought over to supply chain and put in the role that I was in. It was a brand new, newly created role to really help, craft what is the innovation roadmap for parts of the organization. And at the end of the day, I think when we were looking at the innovation capabilities that we were building, there was a couple of disconnects. And one of the disconnects was from the entire culture within J&J Supply Chain. The innovation work that we were doing was working really well for people that maybe sat in an office or are now working from home, or those that are at the executive level. But then when we took a step back and thought about our essential employees, right? And those in a manufacturing plant, those in our distribution centers, there was a gap in terms of how they understood and how they felt empowered and how they could be innovative in the jobs that they were doing. So I think that was kind of an impetus in terms of us thinking about what's that next step. But then we also saw the organization kind of taking this journey of looking at really how can they empower all of us to be bold or be courageous, if you want to use another word. But how can we live into these leadership imperatives in a way that is almost bigger than what we think we should. And that alone would hopefully provide innovation. And so this culture sprint seemed like a really great opportunity to, maybe tackle some of the innovation challenges we were finding from just being able to meet all the personas within the supply chain organization, while also taking these leadership imperatives and giving people a very more specific and tactile way that they could live into them. Because sometimes the leadership imperatives feel really fuzzy almost and hard to implement in the job. Like if you're someone who's picking and packing at a distribution center, how do you live into that leadership imperative? Sometimes that can be really confusing, and we wanted to try to make it easy.
Yeah, and I'm sure, what you're sharing here is ringing true, or people on our participants can relate to what you're sharing. And yeah, I think this ties with an interesting question. You mentioned the manufacturing plants, just all the different roles. And when we talk supply chain, this is 58,000 people. This is a lot of people around the globe doing really important work. And so as we kicked off, we had to identify who would we invite to the sprint. Can you share how we selected those participants and maybe what you would recommend others do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Natalie, I think we're over 58,000 now for supply chain. It is definitely, when we think of opcos within J&J, supply chain is the biggest. It represents over 50% of the employees. So clearly a very important part of culture when we think of J&J. And so in terms of how did we think about approaching, picking the right, the appropriate, I should say, participants for this, we looked at a number of different things. So first and foremost, we knew it was going to be important to have a very diverse, from a global perspective, as well as a position perspective, meaning we needed that person that's working in a manufacturing plant or on the distribution floor. But we also needed the VPs, right? And so we wanted to make sure that we were getting the right people though too, because we didn't want to just pick some random person who maybe was new, just wasn't really into this work and didn't see the value of being involved, because it was a big ask during that sprint. There was a lot of time and energy that they had to put forth to be part of that. And so we used a couple of different measures. We solicited feedback from leaders on their associates in terms of understanding who are those kind of more risk takers in a good way, that are more willing to challenge ideas and be more vocal from an associate level, and got names. But then from a leadership level, we actually looked back on metrics in terms of our voice survey and our Credo survey, and really looked to those surveys. And so based on employee feedback, that's how we chose the ivory tower level individuals, right? The VPs and the senior directors. And so that was through direct employee feedback. But then also it was extremely important, because of the tight turnaround and timeline of the sprint, that we had 100% buy-in for our participants. We didn't want to invite 36 and have only 15 show up. And so we ensured all of their leaders that, so like these individuals, whoever was managing them, we made sure that they were in line and understood the value of this sprint and the need for them to give their employees permission to clear their calendars. And then that helped ensure that the participants really understood how important it was to be part of this. And they didn't feel that they were being pulled in a bunch of different directions because their leader said, clear your calendar, this is a priority, please make sure you show up. And we invited 36 participants, all 36 participated. And I've never seen that in any J&J activity ever. Usually you invite 36 and you get like 10. So definitely an amazing experience to see all of them show up for these, and it was a global group. So some people are joining at like 7, 8, 9 at night and they were still there. It was incredible.
It was incredible. And, when we talk about this sprint, it was all virtual because it happened this year. So we had people from all over the globe. We were on Zoom. I think there were 3-hour workshops over a series of days. And like you said, everybody showed up. We did interviews beforehand. We had the session, and the momentum even continues now. So I would love to hear your perspective on the virtual piece. From our perspective, we had some questions because we've typically done this in person, but we saw a lot of benefits. I'd love to hear from you kind of what worked or maybe what worked less well in this fully virtual sprint.
Yeah, honestly, I think that from a virtual perspective, I feel that, overall it was extremely successful. And I think that the basic challenges are always going to be the hindrances, right? People have poor connectivity, the background noises that we can't control, and that can definitely, be a hindrance for some. But I feel like even in this group, because everyone was aware of the importance of this, they made sure to be in a place that was not subject to maybe interruption as much, and they tried to prioritize having that free space and free time to be part of it. And I think that what was great is that, the capability of being able to do a global sprint. And when you do it virtually, yes, you're saving money, but you're also saving people time, and they're able to juggle everything else that's going on in their lives and still participate. I think it's easier for them to have that work-life balance and be able to do something like this. So I think that was just phenomenal. And I think for us, it's a lesson in, and how we show up and how engaged we are. Really, the audience or the participants respond in kind. And so all of us are like, we're on, because it's Eastern time for us, we're on like at 6:45 in the morning, and we're like, energy. And so we were pushing and challenging ourselves to make sure we showed up as well and stayed very engaged. And I think it's probably one of the most successful experiences I've had for a large group, and doing these doing it virtually. I think also, lastly, when I think of challenges, when you're working with a global group, and all of you here know this, right? Because we have a global group here, sometimes things are lost in translation, and we're all speaking English, but that's not a person's primary language. So how do we make sure that those that are involved are getting the exact intent of what we're asking, and then can feel that they can participate? And I know we worked through that with even having some translators on board. We learn our lingo, like I said before, bold, but how about courageous? Because I learned in Portuguese, bold means crazy. So we don't want to say that to someone from Brazil. And so we learned maybe we need to pivot our language sometimes. And so really great experience overall, though.
Oh, that's a great point. And I see the question came in just on the chat here from Dagmar. I think now is a good time to ask it, which is, what was key here to the leaders to understand what their teams were, really engaged in, and why they were doing this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I joke with Natalie, because I think it took us over 2 weeks to write the communication. Like, why is an email taking 2 weeks? Welcome to J&J. But no, so we knew that the communication that we were going to send to the leaders about allowing their people to participate was extremely important. And so we spent a lot of time on the verbiage of what that communication needed to be, the tone, the sense of urgency. And we also made sure that that message, because we had communications as part of our core team, so we made sure that that message came from our top leadership within supply chain to really also, give that sense of importance. If I were to send it, they'd be like, who's this girl Melody? Like, why is she asking for all this time? No. But when it comes from Kathy Wengel, that has a whole different tone and a whole different sense of importance around it. So that for us was extremely important. And I think that was key to ensuring that so many of the participants or all the participants showed up. So great question.
Yeah, no, that is a great point. And I think just building on what you said around the core team, being very strategic about who is involved in that core team. So we had HR, a member of it, we had the communications group, culture and capabilities. And HR, I would say, is critical as well, because we were hooking into existing systems, right? Those leadership imperatives that people are already measured on, instead of adding a new thing. It was very important. I know we got that guidance early on, that to hook into existing systems and structures.
Yes, we're not here to make life harder for people or give them one new initiative, right? It's all about how can we take what's already there and expected and expand on it, and honestly make it easier for people to understand what they need to do. Absolutely. Yes. Breaking down those silos.
Yes. Yep. Going back to the earlier comment in the chat. So in the workshop, the group had the time to go through the leadership imperatives, really get in detail around, like, what does this thing mean day to day for me? What does it mean to be inclusive on a day-to-day basis, or to collaborate, for example? Then they had the session, it was almost like therapeutic, right? Around the barriers, like, whew, let's just talk about all the things to do instead. What's not working? Yeah, we had some group therapy. And then, it led to this co-creation of these behavior enablers, artifacts, and nudges. And there's a question that came in here, which I think is a great one, where we can talk. Maybe you can share, Mel, some examples of beans that came out. And the question, I think, had to do with concrete measures you implement to connect shop floor workers to innovation activities culture, from Christopher. So maybe you could answer that and share some of the beans. And I think what's behind you might come in.
One is behind me, and I'll explain. I didn't pick this because I'm obsessed with Friends. Well, I am kind of obsessed with Friends, and I love to holler out pivot, if you know what I'm talking about. But there is a purpose to my background, my Zoom background. But in terms of the experience, right, I think what was really great about having these participants, we were also very intentional with how we split them up into the breakout rooms. And because we had VPs, because we had midline managers, and then because we had associates, we wanted to kind of mix and match them in a way that maybe challenge our assumptions on what we might see as outcomes from those different groups. So the group that I was partnering with when we did our breakouts was all VPs. And I didn't even know that. I didn't bother looking because I didn't want to be influenced by that until afterwards. And I was like, oh, I'm glad I didn't say anything stupid. But then other groups had maybe a mix of senior leadership and associates, and then other groups were all associate level. And I think what was incredible about that is that the barriers weren't different. So when we think of barriers to us being able to live fully into our leadership imperatives, they really all ended up being very, very similar when two groups were working on the same leadership imperative. And I found that absolutely incredible. So regardless of where they sat globally and where they sat within the supply chain organization, it was all very, very similar. And I think that for our, when we think about our shop floor, individuals, I think that was very eye-opening for them to see that they weren't alone, and that these are issues that really do cross all of J&J. And I think that was very inspiring and empowering for them to see that just because the VP here in the US is experiencing the same thing that they are. So I think that in terms of that awareness, that's where that came from. So when I think about, when I'm looking at these concrete measures we implemented to connect shop floor workers to innovation activities and culture, that's ongoing. And I can't say a lot about it, but because, it's not something that's published, but in terms of, and I don't know, Natalie, are we going to talk about results? Because I don't want to jump into that if we're going to get to that, but I'll definitely share that. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think getting into some of the beans and actually some of these concrete measures, one observation I had, a lot of them were already happening, but they were happening in pockets. And actually, you mentioned Brazil. There was a lot of cool things happening in Brazil. And so part of this, it was co-creating, it was getting inspired by what we were bringing in, but then it was just finding out almost through a process of appreciative inquiry, what's working today. And I think oftentimes organizations overlook that. So I don't know if you want to now share your background.
Yeah. So I think that, and I know you mentioned Brazil, and I actually think this bean came from Brazil, right? So
yes.
We had some really great beans that, came forward in this sprint. And one of them was called the kitchen party. That is why, and I picked the Friends Kitchen because I feel like for a lot of people, it's a very well-known kitchen. And so the idea behind the kitchen party bean is that a lot of times when you think of the important conversations that happen and where the real stuff gets, talked about and discovered is in the kitchen. And also the kitchen is a place that's usually never clean. It's always a mess. When you have a dinner party, you try to shut that part off in your house. But the reality is by inviting people into the kitchen, it allows for this realness, this authenticity, this understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. It's a way for us to maybe better connect with our customers and with each other. So that the kitchen party bean is a signal to say, all right, let's get vulnerable and get real and get a little messy so we can have a better understanding of one another and what we need to do to move forward. So it's definitely probably one of my favorite beans that came forward. Some other ones, which I think are pretty hilarious, are the Hippo one cracks me up. So Natalie and her team had talked about the Hippo, which is the highest paid person's opinion. That's the acronym. And the Culture Sprint participants thought that was pretty hilarious. And they actually liked the idea of using that acronym as a way to signal our leaders to just not talk. And so they had this bean that was called Shrink the Hippo, meaning in a meeting, it is better for those senior leaders to take a back seat and be less heard and giving everyone else a voice. And so the icon was a shrinking hippo. The irony of that is when we were presenting these beans, one of our senior leaders voiced that they did not like the shrinking hippo. And I said, that is exactly why we need it. But so that was pretty interesting to kind of see that interaction about that bean as well. So I think those are probably two of the biggest beans that came forward. But there was plenty of others, just a lot of fun.
That's great. And the kitchen one, I think every organization can relate to that because every department assumes what the other one wants or is doing and what their motives are. I think just by even saying, hey, finance, hey, marketing, can we have a kitchen conversation? Let's go in the kitchen and just, talk about each of our goals and how the work gets done. And it stuck with us right away.
Yeah.
And one of the things, we've talked about is it's not just the beans themselves, but it really is the process and the process that's caught on. And so can you just share, anything around where you might be using the process in other places? And before you answer, I just want to remind people we'd love to hear your questions. So you can go in the Q&A or in the chat. We're monitoring those.
Yeah. And I see Hugh hollered out pivot. Love it.
Nice.
So yeah, the beanstorming, for me, when I think about ways to empower teams to be innovative and, leverage tools, I thought the beanstorming methodology was a really great technique. And I like it because I like that it openly addresses barriers. And I think that's a really important aspect. And a lot of the innovation work we were doing in the past, it was about, no, we can't talk about barriers. That's going to get in our way. And at the end of the day, it's still going to be on people's minds and it's going to be a barrier to them, even though we're not getting it out there. And so I loved the idea with the BEAN methodology to say, all right, let's talk about the barriers and then let's tackle them. Instead of saying we can overcome them, let's just be very proactive in how we tackle those barriers. And that's where the beanstorming comes in. And so I think what's been really great is in the beanstorm, you can tweak it and use it in a lot of different ways, and it's very, very effective. So one way that I leveraged it is I took an MD, our global MD deliver team, so the distribution side, that segment, through a beanstorming, focusing on innovation behaviors and what's getting in the way of them them signaling intent, them greenhousing ideas, them feeling like they can play at work. And so we used the Beanstorming methodology, and they came up with probably like 36 beans. There was 90 people over 2 sessions that participated. It was huge. And so now they're in the process of refining and prioritizing, and they're gonna tease them out next year every month and do like beans of the month and things like that to continue to inspire and motivate their employees. And then another really interesting way that I was able to leverage the Beanstorming was, and this was really cool, a lot of times when we say design thinking and innovation, people roll their eyes. And I get it, because sometimes when you have those like brainstorming sessions, and I say it in quotes, there's a lot of brainstorming going on, and then there is not any solutions that move forward, right? People brainstorm, they design think, and then it's like, good job, and then nothing happens. So it ends up being just a waste of time. So what I did is I took the Beanstorming methodology, but I also we have what's called JJOS, which is J&J Operating Systems, and those individuals are experts at agile methodology, at lean methodology. And so I partnered the Beanstorming together with their methodology to actually bring forth concrete solutions to solve some of our biggest issues within North American Deliver. And so we did that at the Leadership Summit. So we started out with that Beanstorming of, what are the barriers to preventing us from the problem that we identified? But then after we identified the barriers and talked about the barriers, the solutions, the beans, got moved into a more like process-driven place where JJOS came in to apply some of that agile methodology to be able to move them forward into a solution. So the beans are very structured, but it was extremely successful. And I don't think I would have thought of that if I hadn't gotten access and started working with these beans. So that's been really cool to see that evolution of how that worked out really well. So, and people don't roll their eyes at that experience, which is nice.
That's great. And I think, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier on, but one of the just coolest things for us as consultants is where we see real people using, the things that we come up with on real problems. Like, this is what we live for. And I appreciate you sharing that. And the other thing I really appreciate about what you shared is this idea of it's not like another thing you need to do, but just how you were strategic and linking it into things that already exist in the company, right? So that you can go away from the eye roll and get towards the energy and being productive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see here. So just checking in on our questions. Okay, I thought I saw one just earlier up here.
Well, I think we have a couple in our Q&A. Are any of those?
Okay. Oh, this one around, I think this is interesting. When you look from Christian, when you look at behavior change, often you end up with a long list on the change agenda. Did this happen? How did you prioritize? I think this ties with my question of like, where are we now? So yes. What are the outcomes? What can you share?
Yeah, no, I think, thank you for, parlaying us into this. Yeah. So I think that at the end of the day, there weren't a lot of behaviors that needed to be changed. They were very, very similar globally. But I think what the big aha for us was that what was lacking within J&J Supply Chain was a very crystal clear and applicable at all levels culture strategy. And so our core team, instead of just activating the beans globally, we paused and we thought, how can we ensure that the work we did with this culture sprint is extremely successful, but also make this pivot to be able to, and yes, I said pivot again, make this pivot to be able to also give the organization what it needs. And so we started developing, and we did it in record time, a global culture strategy for all of J&J Supply Chain. And we continued to use our 36 participants as advisors. We looped in additional extended team members globally to keep us honest and ensure that we were staying true to the personas across supply chain. We even created personas to, gut check and make sure we were, not missing the mark. And what resulted is we have a global supply chain strategy that we've launched, and it will be something, it's comprised of 10 vital behaviors. And it is something that people will be expected to build into their goals and objectives next year. And the idea is that of these 10 behaviors, which one or two do you think are going to be imperative for you or for your team to be able to live into in order to be bold in how you reach your goals, or how you're courageous in how you reach your goals? And so that is how we kind of evolved from doing this culture sprint with the beans into these 10 vital behaviors. The beautiful thing is that the beanstorming process can be used to help people like build ideas and thoughts of how they can live those behaviors. But we've also built an entire knowledge center. We have been hard at work the last few months with resources and things that people can tap into to help them learn about the vital behaviors and give them the tools that they need to be able to be successful in living them. So it's really, it's really cool. I'm just so excited to be part of this entire process.
That is great. That is awesome to hear the impact. And also that, you know, a successful outcome is realizing, hey, we didn't have a strategy here. We've got more work to do. And
kind of a myth for 58,000 employees, but we're human. So
we're human. Exactly. So we've got just about 10 more minutes. I have one more question, then we can jump back into the chat. But, you know, we talked about Gallup strengths. So we had this interaction where I asked you, what are those 5 words in your email address? And you explained to me that they were your strengths and explained the whole thing. And I was fascinated by it. And since then, I've learned my strengths. So would love to just hear, you know, your perspective as a coach on how strengths play into doing this type of culture work.
Absolutely. So for those who, first of all, for those who know even what I'm talking about and they have their top 5 strengths, maybe you've heard it as now discover your strengths or lead with your strengths, would love for you to put in the chat what your strengths are. So my top strengths are strategic, activator, self-assurance, individualization, and arranger. And so the whole idea with Clifton strengths and using this strengths kind of methodology is strengths are how we feel, think, and interact with the world around us. Yay, Lorraine, I love it. I have maximizer in my bottom, like my 6 through 10. But so strengths are how we think, feel, and interact with the world around us. And this is a extremely researched and globally researched. So it is applicable across multiple regions and cultures. It's an assessment that is extremely valid. It's really hard to fake it and get a result you think you want. And basically, getting these words, getting these strengths helps us understand how we can, number one, continue to focus on our strengths. Because why would we focus on the things we're not good at? We're probably not going to be good at them, right? Like, I am not a good runner, no matter how I try. I can run a little better, but I'm never going to be running a marathon and, you know, running across the finish line first. That is not me. But I'm going to focus on my strengths. And so the idea is that by focusing on your strengths, you're going to excel. You're going to feel more engaged. You're going to feel more satisfied with what you do. Your stakeholders and customers are going to get that benefit as well. Also about strengths is you understand that each strength, it's like the Hulk. When the Hulk is in full strength mode, if he's self-aware and knows how to use his strengths, it can be extremely productive and he saves the day. But if he's like Crazy Hulk and his strengths are out of control, it can be very self-limiting and not go over too well, right? And that's the same with our strengths, and we call those balconies and basements. So when you have that awareness of your strengths, you also know how to navigate out of your basements when you feel like you might be going down there. So I think what's so handy about strengths is if we know who we are and we know who our teams are through strengths, it allows us to understand how, you know, like when we think about these 10 vital behaviors, let's say, how they might be applicable to them and how we can more aptly coach them to be able to live into the behaviors that we've identified. And also it helps you understand that what I think innovation is, as someone who is an activator, let's say, is going to be very different than someone who has empathy as their number 1 strength, which Natalie does. And so we might look at innovation just a little differently, but there's a beauty to that, right? It doesn't have to be a you against me, right? It's look at the amazing diversity we have and how can we have that understanding and move together in collaboration and engagement to be even more powerful together. Because when you all know your strengths, there is such a power to that in an organization, hands down. And I may be biased because I do coach on it and I do team buildings and things like that, but I have seen it turn around organizations that feel really challenged in how they can get their employees to connect and collaborate at a higher level, as well as just helping people like understand who they are. And I think that's a huge part of culture. So.
Yeah.
Probably a long
I can attest
explanation.
to it. No, it's great. I love your passion. And there's a lot of passion from the group here and a lot of, I think, other strengths coaches as well out there and people sharing their strengths. And what I love about it, personally is, you first get that report and you go directly to the weaknesses. What am I not doing? And so, there is a power in working with someone, coach like Mel to just help you understand it. But then what I like is this whole frame of what's understanding, what are we good at? And I think that's important to do that in an organization as well, to not just focus on the problems, but to focus on where there are those bright spots where you can expand it.
Absolutely. It looks like Dagmar's a coach as well. Very cool. And strategics for #1 strength, as I'm looking in the chat. So that's very cool. Absolutely.
Excellent. So we have one question. We've got just about 5 minutes left around some of the systemic, I'll call them blockers, and how to overcome them. There might be things like reward schemes misaligned. This is a question from Beth here. Did you have, how did you address some of these more systemic organizational issues?
Gotcha. So when I think about that, right? So when you think about reward schemes, I think part of addressing those systemic issues is having a core team that includes all the major players, so to speak, right, within an organization. So that is why HR was part of this process. Communications was part of this process. We had a very diverse group of individuals. Also, what we're looking at is understanding, so are we rewarding the appropriate behavior? And that's still a conversation that we're having as a core team, because is there value in rewarding when people experiment and try, even if they fail? Maybe that needs to be a goal or an objective where we require people to experiment, and whatever that means for them in their role, and really encourage that freedom to not have to have a successful outcome and still meeting your goals and expectations. And that's definitely continuously a challenge, especially in a COVID environment where our customers are relying on us for so many things from a supply chain perspective. But we've seen amazing things, especially in this COVID environment, of what people have done when we have removed the constraints and have said, do what you can. This isn't going to impact your performance. And the outcomes have been absolutely incredible. So we're still learning. And I think that this year has been extremely informative on maybe how we can do a little better.
And I think that also ties to purpose, which is where you started us when you described, who Johnson & Johnson is and what you do. And I do have a question here. I put my lightning round ones, but I'd love to hear from you. What's your favorite thing about working in supply chain?
No, absolutely. So, I've worked on the commercial side. So I've been in sales, I've done the marketing, the training, and all that. And then I made the shift over to supply chain. And I think what I love about supply chain is that these are individuals that have never had the opportunity to even speak to an end user. So their customers, right, are different than what I call a customer on the commercial side. But so when I think about med device, or when I think about pharmaceuticals, these individuals in supply chain have never talked to a doctor about our products in an interactive way. They've never been able to hear from a doctor a success story about a product that we have or a device. I was fortunate because I lived that for years. And I also got the bad side too, when doctors didn't like our stuff, but the good always outweighed the bad, right? And but these people in supply chain were still so dedicated, so inspired, and so committed to our credo and to our purpose. That just floored me in terms of their heart that they put into what they did, regardless of where they sat in the supply chain. They valued and felt that their job, and know that their job, is extremely important. And so that really, really impressed me, that they still had that drive and that heart without having that exposure to some of the direct feedback, right, of the power of what J&J has done for people. So I thought that's amazing to me.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so maybe in our last couple of minutes, I can share and you can share just advice you have for other folks who are looking to get started, who might want to do their own culture sprints or Beanstorm.
Yeah, I think that, you expect people to, put up barriers and dig in their heels, right? Let's not be naive. But I think that the biggest learnings are ensure that you have the right representation for your organization. I think that's key in getting buy-in as well as getting the right results that you want. I think that's number one, first and foremost. And it's really important to have leadership alignment across the key like sectors that you know you're going to need support. So when I think of for us, HR, communications, strategy and innovation, we really, I mean, our company vice chairman, they all knew what we were doing. And so it was extremely important that that knowledge was there so that they could help us remove barriers as well. So
great. No, I love that. And I guess I would say is just get started too. I think, yes, you need that alignment, but also you can get started on your team. There's lots of tools. We've got 101 beans that are available on our digital hub. We've got lots of tools. And of course, there are things in the book. But just as we hit time here, just want to thank everybody for joining, for your thoughtful questions and comments and sharing your strengths. We just love to see that. And thank you, Mel, for sharing your story and all your insights.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Natalie. And for those on, would love to connect on LinkedIn. It's just Melody Fillier. So hope that we can stay connected in the future and continue to collaborate. So
great.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, hey, have a great rest of your day, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.